His luck finally ran out at Singapore Island when he, along with 120,000 other British troops, surrendered to the Japanese, the biggest defeat in British military history. Singapore Island fell to the Japanese on 15th February 1942. News that shook the world. But it seems the scale of this war was now attracting the attention of someone or something else entirely. Because just 9 days later, in Los Angeles, California, on the night of 24th, 25th February 1942, American radar operators saw something coming their way. Eyeing their screens with growing apprehension, the rookie radar guys reached for the phone and told the local gun crews they had a slow-moving, unidentifiable object of vast dimensions inbound, and unless it changed course sometime very soon, then it would pass directly over the city. And pass it did. Could this be some kind of Japanese secret weapon? Or perhaps a mass formation of aircraft about to repeat the events of Pearl Harbor here on the American mainland? The local military commander was taking no chances. He ordered a citywide blackout, and one by one, the lights of LA fell into darkness. Searchlight beams cut the sky as the young gunners swung into action, filling the air with machine gun bullets and high explosive shells. In the early hours of 25th of February, they would unleash no less than 1,400 shells upon a disc-like object that was caught time and again within the arcing searchlight beams, but to no avail. Whatever this thing was, these kind of weapons were unable to have any impact upon it. None at all. They literally bounced off. A myriad of eyewitnesses stated that they had heard the sound of bullets and shells striking metal before ricocheting back down toward the ground or explode harmlessly in mid-air. The giant disc did not retaliate, but rather it just lumbered slowly away inland and out of range from the frantic barrage. The media was filled with speculation about what had really occurred in the skies over LA on that February night, but it was soon lost in the fog of war as attention turned to the great naval battles raging in the Pacific Ocean. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox dismissed the entire thing as just one great false alarm. Young, nervous, raw recruits getting the jitters and going trigger-happy, firing off shells at a ghost in the sky. And so began the first ever documented cover-up of a UFO encounter. Because just 8 days later, Secretary of the Army, General George Marshall, wrote an eyes-only report to President Roosevelt, affirming that this had been no mistake, no false alarm. On the contrary, something had been brought down, in fact, lots of somethings, all over Southern California. And investigations into these objects had concluded that these vessels were not of this world, but rather they were almost certainly of interplanetary origin. Visitors to our world from outer space. Roosevelt concluded the American public had enough to worry about fighting the Japanese and ordered the entire thing to be kept secret. But it didn't go away. Instead, a new phenomena appeared in the skies, the so-called Foo Fighters, bright glowing spheres and discs that buzzed by Allied aircraft. Many believed these to be enemy secret weapons. But Roosevelt, he knew better. In documents that came to light many years later, we learn how he not only silenced the issue, but actually set his scientific teams to work deconstructing these objects in order to use the pirated technology to build more powerful weapons that might more quickly turn the tide of war America's way. Indeed, it now seems possible, even likely, that retrieved alien technology may have contributed to the Manhattan Project. That's the one which led to the creation of the atomic bombs that finally brought Japan to its knees. But in early 1942, that wouldn't be happening anytime soon. And right now, dear old Dad now had 3.5 miserable years of captivity at the hands of the Japanese to look forward to. There was a reason why they called it Railroad of Death, because that's exactly what it was. In effect, the Far East version of Auschwitz. And then some. Prisoners as thin as skeletons working 18 hours a day on half a cup of rice in 120 degrees of heat, lifting heavy weights, rail sleepers. The Japanese used some for bayonet practice just for the hell of it. Many died of dysentery, malnutrition, or a myriad of jungle diseases, with the occasional snake bite or even crocodile attack thrown in. It wasn't a fun place. One morning Dad woke up and the men either side of him in the same tent were both dead, but he wasn't telling. Instead, Dad reported them sick and collected their rations, which he ate himself. Only after several nights of sleeping right between two dead bodies did he drag them off and burn the corpses. That UFO, remember the UFO? It would sometimes appear in his dreams. He wondered what it had meant when it told him everything was going to be all right in the end, because it sure as hell wasn't looking so good right now. Anyway, the railroad was eventually completed, the tide of war turned, and Dad was put on a flotilla of 5 Japanese POW ships, each displaying the words POW on great huge bed sheets hung down the side of the hull, but that didn't help. Not when American submarines spotted them headed for Japan. Torpedoes struck 3 of those 5 ships, which exploded and went down, taking with them all of the Allied prisoners on board. But my dad, of course, was on one of the 2 that survived and made it to Japan, where he saw out the war at Mitsushima POW camp, southwest of Tokyo. His health was deteriorating though, and by now he was suffering repeated bouts of malaria. The Japanese were no longer willing to waste any of their medicines on British or American POWs. Then one day, a new batch of prisoners were transferred into the camp, telling strange stories of how they had barely survived 2 massive explosions, unlike anything they had ever experienced before. Bombs so terrible they had literally destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They evaporated into nothingness. These were, of course, nuclear explosions, and they meant the war was over. A few days later, the Mitsushima prisoners were put on a train and sent to Yokohama Bay, Tokyo, where the American Marines were just coming ashore. They found Dad in pretty bad shape. He was coughing, sweating, shivering, and kind of on the edge. So they stretchered him off aboard a hospital ship named the USS Rescue. That ship remained in Japan for quite some time, allowing Dad and many others to fully recover. From her nearby anchorage point, they even witnessed General Douglas MacArthur conduct the formal Japanese surrender that signalled the very final closing act of World War II. He was there, saw it all. But with that done, USS Rescue set sail for the Philippine Islands, where the British POWs were to be transferred to one of their own ships, the aircraft carrier HMS Implacable. And now here comes the twist. And you knew there'd be one, didn't you? Of course you did. This could not end as just another war story. Oh no, I'm not letting you off that light. The old man, he was a handsome devil, real handsome devil. an every inch a lady's man, which soon won him the affections of a pretty little American nurse. I believe her name was Rachel. And of course this was an illicit relationship between a nurse and a patient, so they had to keep it quiet, very quiet. Somewhere between Yokohama Bay and Manila, in the early hours, just as dawn was breaking over the Pacific, Dad met with his American lover. The two of them doing the whole Titanic thing somewhere up forward near the bows of the ship. And then, suddenly, there it was. A brilliant silver glint on the horizon. The object moved rapidly towards the ship. It was huge. A saucer-shaped vessel with an incandescent blue cross on the underside. Yes, the exact same UFO Dad had seen back in Suffolk before the war. It was moving a little quicker this time, but the girls saw it too. And as it passed directly overhead, they both got the same message. See? I told you so. I told you it would all be all right in the end. Now you can be forgiven for thinking that that's how this story ended. Oh, but it didn't. It did not end there. Sure enough, the USS Rescue docked at Manila Bay, where Dad and his little American lady friend went their separate ways, never to meet again. And I always feel so sad about that part. A couple of months later, dear old Dad arrived back in Suffolk, England. Well, that was a bit of a shock to his family, who had sold all of his goods and spent all of his money, having convinced themselves, a little conveniently perhaps, that he was dead. But Jack Solomon Sr. was very, very much alive. Indeed, he had enough life in him to go straight away and find himself a new girlfriend. That's when he met a certain Marjorie Norman, a farmer's daughter, the woman who many years later would become my mother. I don't know why they dated for 10 years before they got married, but they got around to it in the end, and a few years after that, I fell out of the sky and found myself back on this planet. Here I am. Now fast forward a few years and we find ourselves back on that very same farm. The one my mother's parents worked on. Those were my grandparents. That was Bob and Alice Norman. There's little boy me, now aged maybe 8 or 9, and one sunny afternoon I'm sitting in an apple tree. I loved that tree. It was shaped like a giant hand. The perfect cradle for me to sit and stare up at the clouds, where I was already having those same spiritual visions I spoke of in that first video on this channel. But today, something fell off. Time was slowing down, like a video on slow speed. It's the only way I can think to word it. Nothing felt solid. I could have put my hand straight through any of those branches and met no resistance. I knew. I didn't try, but I knew. And there it was, passing from east over the North Sea to west. A huge silver disc with a burning blue cross on the underside. Yet I had no idea my father had seen this thing, because he wouldn't tell me that for another 40 years or more. So I just sat and watched for God knows how long as it passed again over in the direction of the river a mile or two away to the east. I knew even then at that young age that this was the day everything changed. My life was never going to be the same again. I would soon enough find that forest down the road. Not that I needed to, because, well, you don't need to go looking for any of that. Believe me, you don't. This kind of thing, it will find you wherever you are, and it would find me right on that same farm over and over again. But I did find that forest, and in the years to come I would have many, many encounters with those from the age as yet to come. I have to tell you, I wrote a song about it. That's it, the one you can probably hear playing about now. Diamond in the Sky. You can watch the video or download the song by clicking this link right here.